How's it going, everybody? And welcome to the Fourth and Long podcast with your host, Alec Pecano, on Wednesday, October 16th. Today's show is kind of busy. We've got my upset picks, over under picks, picks against the spread, my co host, over under picks, upset picks, and a new segment we like to call Me Wild. And I'm going to talk about a lot more on the show, but let's get started here. And we are going to start with, as well as game picks. But let's get started here. My co host upset picks are his first one is Boston College over Virginia Tech. And I thought about doing this one at the beginning of the week, but then I'm like, I can't do it because it goes against what I think, and that is Virginia Tech still has a shot at winning the ACC. His second one is Oklahoma State over BYU. I guess he has learned his lesson about picking against Oklahoma State. And Louisville over Miami is his last one. His over-under picks are Alabama versus Tennessee. He likes the over 56.5. And I have a similar game to that coming up here in a second. He's got the under 57.5 and the UAB South Florida game. And he likes over 56.5 at Georgia and Texas. And then his Call Me Wild, he's got 3. He thinks North Texas is going to beat Memphis. And I kind of agree with that. He's got Duke will blow out Florida State. That's another Friday night game. And he's got South Carolina to upset Oklahoma. Now we get to my upset picks. Well, our upset picks. Because you guys are part of the MVPs. And here's our upset picks. Our first one is South Carolina +3 to upset Oklahoma. So we also had one of our upsets was the same as our co-host for this show. We both like South Carolina to upset Oklahoma because Oklahoma, let's just face it, they have no offense. All right, our second upset is Coastal Carolina +4 to upset Louisiana. Now this upset, I think, has a very good chance of happening, and I can see it happening a lot. And then our last upset is Oklahoma State +8 to upset BYU. So 2 out of our 3 upsets are the same here. My picks against the spread. First one is UTEP, which they play tonight at 9 p.m. +5.5 to cover against FIU. We've picked FIU on the point spread before. We're going against them this time. Our second pick against the spread is Western Michigan +1 to cover against Buffalo. And Buffalo is sneaky good this year, and I was wrong on them. And the last cover pick is Maryland +5.5 and a bounce back spot against USC to cover 5.5 to cover against USC. And I think they will cover. And here's my over-under picks. My first over-under pick is Colorado versus Arizona. Total sits at 55.5. Give me over 55.5 points. And again, another one I have in common with my co-host is I have Georgia and Texas. And I also like the over of 55. He had it at 57. I'm taking over 55. You can take with either one you want. And then the last over-under pick for me, it's going to be an under, and it's New Mexico in Utah State. And when I checked earlier in the week, it was at 77.5. And we all know that if anything over 70, you always take the under or you stay away from the game. You don't touch the game if the total is over 70 points. And in this case, I'm going to take under. Now we get to Call Me Wild for me. And it is, I have 3. Count it. Oh, and my game picks. I have Texas over Georgia. I have USF over UAB. Tennessee over Alabama. Virginia Tech over Boston College. And now Call Me Wild. I'm calling it now. There's going to be 4 upsets this week. The first one is Illinois over Michigan. Number 2 is Georgia Tech over Notre Dame. Number 3, Arkansas over LSU. And number 4, Arizona State over Cincinnati. And then I've got Kyron Jones is going to throw for 380 passing yards and 4 touchdowns against Boston College this week on Friday night. And then I've got Kentucky beats Florida. And I'm just blown away by how Florida's actually favored in this game. It just doesn't it doesn't make any sense to me how Florida is actually favored against Kentucky. I feel like Kentucky should be the team favored and not Florida. And the other thing I'm surprised by, and I'm gonna elaborately talk about this, is the fact that there's been no head coaches fired so far in college football. I thought by this time there would be at least 2 or 3 fired, but there wasn't. At least yet there hasn't been. I think we're getting close to getting our first coach firing. And it's not going to be Billy Napier. I think he might be safe. I think it might be Sonny Cumbie of Louisiana Tech. I think he might be the first coach to get fired this year. And I don't think it's even close. And I think there could be other coaches fired. Look out for a team right now. Look out for Purdue to fire Ryan Walters. They've already fired their offensive coordinator, Graham Harrell. And I don't think they would be against pulling the trigger and getting rid of Ryan Walters. Even though they're in a rebuild, I could see them going in a different direction at head coach. Because there is some young head coaches out there that would like to be, some young offensive coordinators out there that would like to be head coaches. I'll give you a couple. One is Rob Easel, the offensive coordinator at South Alabama. Yes, if that does sound familiar, that's because that is he is a former wide receiver from Alabama, and I think he would fit perfectly as a head coach somewhere. The next one is Robert Livingston, defensive coordinator at Colorado. I think he's ready to be a head coach. And I know there's people out there that say, no, he's not leaving Deion. The thing is, money talks, and if he gets enough money from a school, he will leave Colorado and go be the head coach somewhere, whether it be Louisiana Tech, whether it be Florida, whether it be Arkansas, whether it be Florida State. If they decide to go in a different direction and get rid of Norvell. which I don't see that happening. But then again, it could. And one other coach that I think could get fired within the next few weeks is the head coach at Temple, and Stan Drayton. I think he could get fired, and they could bring in an interim and look for somebody to promote from within. But and there's 3 guys that could replace Billy Napier at Florida, and I will talk about them right now. Number 3 being a guy that used to be a head coach, Butch Jones, and he's the head coach at Arkansas State right now. I think, and I'm going to get this out of the way right now, I think Butch Jones would do a good job at Florida if Napier is fired. Number 2, very unlikely, but Deion Sanders. If he wanted to leave Colorado, because his son is going pro, and I believe Travis Hunter is going to go pro too, and Shiloh's going to go pro too. So that's 3 guys that came with him from Jackson State to Colorado. And I can see Deion leaving and either going to Florida, or Florida State, like I said earlier, gets rid of Norvell. Deion is the top candidate for Florida State if they get rid of Norvell. But back to Florida, I could possibly see Deion going to Florida, but it would take a lot because he is an FSU alum. And we don't normally see rivals go and coach other schools. And number 1 for me is Brady Hoke, the old Michigan head coach. I can see Brady Hoke coming back into coaching and going to Florida and being the head coach at Florida. I'll tell you 2 names that absolutely I don't think will be in the running for the head coaching job at Florida. Number 1 being a guy that everybody wants to talk about, Steve Spurrier. Steve Spurrier, it's 2 guys, Urban Meyer and Steve Spurrier as number 1. I don't see either of them coming back and coaching. Urban Meyer went on a podcast and said that he is not going to come back and coach the Gators. It is time for a young blood to take over the Gators and coach them. Now, and then Steve Spurrier basically said the same thing on a podcast last show he went on. He said that there's no way he's coming back to coaching for the Gators. He doesn't want to tarnish his reputation he had. And then the other guy is Brian Hartline. I can't see Hartline going to Florida. I can't. He wants to stay at, I can't see Hartline or Chip Kelly, Brian Hartline or Chip Kelly going to be the head coach at Florida. And I'll tell you why. Unless Chip Kelly gets paid a boatload of money, then so be it. If he does, and he pulls a Bill O'Brien and leaves, I'm not going to be mad because he helped us. The 1 year he was here, he helped us win. But Brian Hartline, I think they're grooming him. And mark my words, and come back to this podcast in 2 to 3 years. They are grooming Brian Hartline to be the next head coach at Ohio State. I'm pretty sure of that. Because he could have taken a job somewhere else. He could have done the Tony Alford route and said, you know what, my contract's coming up in a couple of years, and I'm going to leave and go somewhere else. And he could have, he hasn't. So that signals to me that he might be sticking around until Ryan Day either gets fired or retires. And that's another thing I'm going to talk about here with all these fan bases here in a second is, and I'm actually going to talk about it right now. These fan bases, after one or two losses, they jump on the boat and say, oh, we need to fire our head coach. Like Ohio State. They lost by 1 point to Oregon, and everybody wants to bring up that Ryan Day's 2-6 against his rivals. The problem I have is it's not him. The fan base, Ohio State fans in general, y'all need to chill. It's one loss, and I talked about it on this show the other night. Some Ohio State fans just don't understand how spoiled we are with head coach. We had Jim Tressel. We had Urban Meyer. We had Woody Hayes. I think we had Bo Schembechler at one point. I know Bo Schembechler was also a Michigan coach, but we had him at one point as well. And they need to calm down. All fan bases need to calm down after one or two losses. If you lose more than 3 games, then okay, then you can start talking about maybe it's time to fire the coach. But if they have 1 or 2 losses, it is not time to fire the coach yet. And if they leave for a better job or they get paid more money to go somewhere else, so be it. Deal with it. You can bring in a new head coach or promote from within. And that's how that is. And I would say we're going to look at the transfer portal, but the transfer portal is not really open. And that's the other thing. That's the other thing I'm going to briefly cover on the show right now is these people, don't listen to these people that are putting out way too early transfer portal predictions. I was going to do it, but I'm going to wait a little bit. I'm going to wait till my co-host is back and maybe we do it just to gauge what the transfer portal looks like. But there's people on social media that are already putting out their transfer portal predictions for guys they think are going to jump in the portal after the season. And I've seen some absurd ones. Like at Ohio State, they're saying that Aaron Nolan's going to jump in the portal. And I've heard that if anybody leaves Ohio State, it isn't going to be Aaron Nolan. It might be Devin Brown, even though he's been the one that's been the most loyal to Ohio State. He might jump in the portal and go somewhere else. And so don't believe everything you see on Instagram about the transfer portal because the portal hasn't opened yet. These guys could jump in the portal, but they can't talk to teams yet. There's been a couple guys that have hopped in the portal and they've already started getting interest from teams. There's a guy that jumped in the portal last week that's already got interest from 6 different schools. It is too early to try to, you can make your own predictions on where you think these guys are going to go, but stuff changes. And we need to realize that. Stuff changes over the offseason. Like, I was wrong with half the players I said were going to go certain places in the offseason when I did my portal. And me and my co-host will do that. Now that I have a co-host, we will do it again in the offseason. But if you've enjoyed this video, please remember to like, subscribe, turn on the notification bell so you don't miss another upload. Comment down below your opinion on the whole transfer portal, NIL, and conference realignment. But I will see everybody. This was a shorter podcast. I'm going to try to figure out other stuff to talk about tomorrow on the podcast. Tomorrow on the tomorrow night's show. Because there will be no show Friday. And also, just so y'all know, Saturday night, 7:30, we will have a watch party for the Texas-Georgia football game. Yes, it will be happening. Watch party for Texas-Georgia. And You'll get my analysis on the game, Q&A, no play-by-play. The only time I do play-by-play is when I have my co-host with me. When it's just me riding solo, we do watch parties. That's how it's going to work moving forward. Is when it's just me by myself, it'll be watch parties. When my co-host is with me, like November 1st, we have South Florida and Florida Atlantic. That will be a play-by-play. And then November 2nd will be a watch party for Ohio State, Penn State. But that's going to do it for tonight's podcast. I will see y'all back here tomorrow for the first episode of the Four Quarters podcast, which is my NBA podcast, where I talk about the NBA, and another episode of the Fourth and Long podcast, which I will be again running solo on the show because my co-host, again, unless he feels better, he's under the weather still, and he should be back next week. But have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday night.